All right, we're gonna finish our story. So Leo and Wilkie just jumped through the fire. Their leap through the flames took just seconds, but Leo knew that for as long as he lived, he would never forget the feeling of that scorching heat. The fire seemed to pull at the blanket like a beast hungry for Leo's flesh. When they came out, Wilkie's pant leg was on fire. "Look out!" Leo called. Leo grabbed the blanket and patted out the flames. You can see they're jumping through the flames. They looked at each other in shock. They'd made it. But still, the smoke was thick and it hurt to breathe. "Do you see him?" Leo shouted. "I can barely see anything," Wilkie said. Leo remembered Grandpa crawling through the brush looking for the stream. "Get down," Leo said, dropping to his knees. The air was clearer closer to the ground, but the heat was searing. The wall of fire roared behind them. "Get out! It's all burning! It's too late!" They had just a minute or two to find Morris and get out, Leo knew. Bits of glass from shattered windows cut into Leo's hands and knees as he crawled. His heart pounded with fear and he felt dizzy from the smoke. He and Wilkie screamed Morris's name, but with the shouting of the crowd and the roaring of the fires, it was almost impossible to hear anything. Until finally they heard a voice. "Leo, over here!" The voice was weak. Leo moved forward and then his heart gave a wild jump. All he could see was Morris's head on the ground. Only his head. His body was gone. Wilkie came up behind Leo and gasped, "What?" Leo almost jumped up and ran in horror, but then he understood. Morris's head hadn't been cut off. He'd fallen into some kind of hole. Only his head and one arm were sticking out. "I'm stuck," Morris said. "I can't breathe." Wilkie rushed over and grabbed Morris's arms with both hands. He gave a mighty tug, but Morris barely budged. "It's tight in here," Morris said. "Go slow." Inch by inch, Wilkie pulled Morris from the earth like a farmer pulling a gigantic carrot from his garden. With each second that passed, the crackling roar of the fire grew louder. Sweat poured off of Leo's body. Wilkie finally got Morris out of the hole. Leo grabbed a hold of Morris, who wobbled on his feet. He held on to him even after Morris was steady. "I'm okay," Morris said. "We need to get out." Morris pointed to an open window just above a heap of garbage. "That way," he said. "That's how Fletch got out. He knew I was stuck. I was calling to him, but he just kept going." Anger rose up in Leo, but there was no time to think about Fletch now. They all climbed up the heap of garbage. Wilkie got to the top first. He clambered through the window and then reached out to help Morris and Leo get in. They were in somebody's bedroom. A dresser had smashed down on top of the bed. It looked like it had dropped through a giant hole in the ceiling. Luckily, it seemed that the person who lived here had escaped. The heat was very strong, and Leo was sure that some of the rooms of this building were burning. He prayed that they could make it down in time before the fire reached them or the building collapsed on top of them. They found the stairs and began to make their way down. They walked lightly, but with each step the stairway swayed. The wood groaned and creaked. One small aftershock and this whole place would tumble to the ground. Wilkie suddenly stopped short. "Hurry, Wilkie," Leo said, but then he saw it. A body was lying on the floor. At first he thought it was the person who lived here, but then came the rasping voice. "Wilkie," the body groaned. It was Fletch. Fletch looked at Milky with a sweet smile painted on his face. "I knew you'd find me, old pal. I knew it. I was sitting here praying, and here you are." Fletch was clutching that white flour sack. "Here," he said. "See, I saved it for you. I was going to come look for you. I swear I was." "Sure you were, Fletch," Wilkie said in a weak voice. "I know you didn't forget about me." Morris and Leo looked at each other, unsure of what was happening. Did Wilkie really believe Fletch's lies? Was he going to join back up with him? "Come on," Fletch asked. "We can share with your new buddies, too, if that's what you want." "Whatever you say, pal, whatever you say." "I'll take care of you, Fletch," Wilkie said. "Of course you will," Fletch said. "We're a team, you and me. We take care of each other." Wilkie snatched the flour sack from Fletch. He handed it to Leo. "Your gold is in there," he said. "Take it." "Sure," Fletch said. "Sure thing. Let the kid have his gold back. We're all friends now." It was filled with money, the sack. Bills and coins, watches and wallets. He found his gold nugget. It felt warm as though it had been in Papa's hand just moments before. He handed the flour sack back to Wilkie. Wilkie stepped back and stared at Fletch. "You left me for dead," Wilkie said. "No," Fletch cried. "I was coming back for you. That's where I was heading. I swear it." Leo could see the rage on Wilkie's face. It was as though the heat and the fury of the fire had taken control of him. Wilkie grabbed a splintered piece of wood and raised it up so it was over Fletch. Leo and Morris both leaped forward. "No, Wilkie!" They each grabbed one of Wilkie's massive arms. Wilkie shook them off like they were butterflies. He glared at Fletch. He was set to smash that wood over him, but Morris moved so that he was between them. "We don't have time for this," Morris said in his matter-of-fact voice. "We have to go." Leo stood frozen, afraid that Wilkie might hurt Morris. Then what would happen? But somehow Morris could always get people to pay attention, whether they wanted to or not. Leo reached up and took hold of the wood. Wilkie held it tight, but finally he let Leo take it. Wilkie grabbed Fletch roughly by the arm and stood him up. Fletch cried out in pain. Leo could see that his leg was horribly twisted. He needed to get to a hospital. Wilkie didn't care. He dragged Fletch, yelling and limping, out into the street and tossed him onto the sidewalk. There were 2 policemen just up the street. "Maybe they'll help you," Wilkie said. Then he spat on the ground and stormed away. Leo and Morris hurried after him. None of them looked back at Fletch, but they could hear his rasping cries echoing behind them. They'd walked just a few blocks when they passed a woman standing in front of a ruined, burning house. Her 4 little children were gathered around her, their clothes tattered and covered with ash. The woman was sobbing to a soldier. "I've lost everything," she wailed. "My husband, my house, everything. What will we do? What will become of me and my children?" The soldier patted the woman's arm, but then moved on. Wilkie stopped short. He went to the woman. Without a word, he handed her the flour sack. Then he turned and hurried back to Leo and Morris. Leo could see that Wilkie's face had changed. The blazing look was gone, and a peaceful look had come over him. He didn't look back at the woman, but Leo did. He watched her open the bag and look in. Leo knew he'd never forget the look of amazement on her face. With every hour they walked, they heard of new fires, new neighborhoods destroyed. All of the streets south of Market, Rincon Hill, downtown, Chinatown. City Hall was gone. So was the library with its 1 million books. Morris got tears in his eyes when he heard that. Hundreds of little fires had joined together into huge firestorms that raced through the city. No neighborhood was safe, and so they just kept walking. Leo had never been so tired or thirsty. His entire body ached, his eyes burned, and he had cuts all over his hands. He had no idea where they'd end up, but he was still in one piece. That was something. He had his gold nugget back, and he had a feeling inside, one he hadn't felt since Papa was still alive. Walking between Wilkie and Morris, his shoulders brushing theirs, he knew in his heart that he wasn't alone. Okay, so now we're on a new day. It's April 21st. Leo stood on the train platform at the Sacramento station. The sun shone brightly in the clear blue sky. Beside him, Morris had his face turned up, enjoying the fresh, clear air. All around them were refugees from San Francisco. There were all different kinds of people, fancy ladies and street kids, Chinese families and scruffy gamblers, businessmen and very old people. Coats and hats were covered with ash and dust. Some people wore bandages or walked with crutches, and they all shared the same expression, a mixture of shock and relief. Their city was gone. Thousands were dead, but they had escaped alive. They'd gotten to the California capital just that morning. Leo, Morris, Wilkie, and thousands of strangers. The Southern Pacific Railroad had given out 1 free train ticket to anyone who wanted to leave San Francisco. After spending 3 miserable days in Golden Gate Park, all the boys wanted to get as far away from San Francisco as they could. The park had been turned into a tent city. Soldiers handed out food and water, but there wasn't enough for everyone. Leo and the guys had waited in line all day just to get a piece of bread and a little water. Sleeping was impossible with all those crying and screaming. The fires had finally gone out on the 4th morning after the earthquake, but smoke and ash still filled the sky. Every breath reminded Leo of what had happened. Some people in the tent city were already talking about rebuilding. A preacher had stood in front of a crowd, calling on them not to give up on San Francisco. "Our city is gone," he said, "but its spirit is here. We will rebuild." Leo believed it. Grandpapa had helped build the city the first time, when it had been turned from a bunch of shacks in the mud into one of the most beautiful cities in the world. But Leo knew that he needed to put the ruins and smoke behind him. Even before the quake, he'd been looking for a fresh start. Wilkie and Morris needed one too. They'd left Golden Gate Park and walked for 3 hours through the smoldering ruins to get to the train station. They crowded onto the first train they could. 5 hours later, they were breathing in clear air, gazing up at buildings that stood strong and tall. The earth was still. They figured they'd stay in Sacramento. They'd sell newspapers, they'd share a room, they'd get by. But over these past few hours, their plans had changed. That morning, the three of them had gone to a bank. Within the hour, Leo had sold his gold nugget. It's what Grandpapa would have done, he was sure, and what Papa would have wanted Leo to do. He had enough money to buy Wilkie a train ticket to Seattle. Wilkie was going to find that man who wanted to turn him into a football star. "Why don't you guys come with me?" Wilkie said. "You could play too. We could all be on the same team." "We already are on the same team," Morris said in that wise voice of his. They all smiled. They were some team, the three of them. Leo had the idea that they always would be, no matter where life took them. But Leo and Morris weren't going with Wilkie. They had a plan of their own. Leo had bought 2 tickets to New York City. He and Morris would find Morris's cousins. They would start new lives there. It was a crazy idea, Leo knew, but no crazier than when Grandpop had left New Hampshire to make his fortune in gold country. Wilkie took a long look at them before he got onto the train, like he was painting their pictures in his mind. "I'll see you again," he said. He stuck his hand out and Leo and Morris put their hands on top of his. Their fingers were cut up, black with ash and grime, scraped raw in spots. But their hands looked strong, especially put all together. The train whistle blew, and then just as when he gave that sack of loot to the crying lady, Wilkie turned and hurried off without another word. Leo and Morris stood in silence, watching Wilkie's train disappear. They bought themselves some cold bottles of milk and warm rolls, and then there was nothing to do but wait for their own train. Leo felt in the pocket where the gold nugget used to be. "Do you miss your gold?" Morris asked quietly. "No, I don't," Leo said. The words came out quickly, and Leo was surprised to hear them. But no, he didn't miss it. It was taking Leo and Morris where they needed to go, and Papa had given him other treasures, he realized, priceless treasures. All those stories about Grandpa and the belief Leo had in his own luck and courage. That came from Papa too, a faith stronger and shinier than gold. And now as he waited for his train, Leo heard Papa's words brighter and clearer than ever. Something remarkable was going to happen to him. He could feel it. All right, that's the end. So that's a crazy story, isn't it? So the part about Leo and Morris and Wilkie is made up. That did not actually happen. The author just made that story up. But the truth about young boys who were as young as poor Leo working, that was true. Lots of them had to get jobs and didn't go to school. The part about the earthquake and the huge fire afterwards, also true. If you have a grown-up at your house and they're okay with it, they could help you Google the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, and you can read about how the earthquake was very bad, but it was the fire that kind of decimated the whole entire city. All right, I hope you enjoyed that story, and remember the AR quiz number is on the title of this page.